Hey guys, so welcome to part 34 in our SQL Server tutorial playlist. Previously in part 33, we had looked at an overview of constraints in SQL Server, what they are, why we need them, how we use them, and we did a brief overview of the 6 most commonly used constraints in SQL Server. For the next few videos, we're going to be diving deep into each of the majorly used SQL Server constraints, starting with this one, the not null constraint. So let's dive in and let's just have an understanding of what the not null constraint is. So basically, if you remember when we had talked about constraints, they are rules that you can specify on a table or on a column, and these allow you to basically specify what kind of data or the rules that must be followed while these columns or data tables are being created, so that the data being entered conforms to some standards that you want to set. So one of these constraints is the not null constraint, and as the name suggests, the not null constraint enforces a column to not accept null values. In SQL Server, by default, a column can hold null values, but with the specification of the not null constraint, columns will not accept null values. So this enforces a field to always contain a value, which means that you cannot insert a new record or update a record without adding a value to this field. So if you try to insert a row of data and you leave a null value in a column that has been specified with the not null constraint, then that data won't be inserted. You will get an error back. So let's dive into the demonstration now. So I'm using Azure Data Studio to use SQL Server on a Mac. If you're on Windows, you're probably using SQL Server Management Studio. I've got installation guides to both of these in the description below and the top right hand corner of the screen. And also I'll link to a GitHub repository in the description with all of the code that I'm using in this demonstration, so you can follow along at your own pace. So let's begin by basically just creating a new table of data. So I've got a statement written down. So I'm creating a table called students with just an ID, first name, a last name, a varchar, which first name and last name which are varchars, email is a varchar, gender varchar, and age integer. So let me go ahead and create this table. And following that, I'm going to insert some data into this table. So I'm just going to insert 2 rows so we can keep this simple. In the first one, I'm inserting ID 1, first name John, last name JR, email jj@gmail.com, gender and age. So, and in the second row of data, I'm inserting a null value at ID and name, and I'm filling everything else up with some other random values. But it's important to know that I'm putting a null value here. In some SQL tools other than SQL Server, you can just leave it blank, but in SQL Server you require to write down the null value. So let's just run this. So you can see 2 rows have been affected. Now if you want to view the table that we've created, we just write select star from students and run this specific line, we get the table. So as you can see in the second row, under the ID column, we have a null value, and nulls are generated when there's some flaw in the way we input or gather the data. So normally they shouldn't exist, but to make sure that they don't get into the data and muck up our data, we specify these constraints. So now suppose I wanted to create a table, students, which had a not null constraint on the ID column, because obviously ID is the most important column, and every student, whether it's in a school or a college, must have an ID, right? So let's create this second table with a not null constraint on the ID column. So we can just copy over the first table we had created, and again, being creative, we'll call it students 2. And how we specify a not null constraint, I'll just pull up the syntax again here for you for a second. We can see that you just basically have to specify a not null constraint after the data type. So it's as simple as that. So after integer int, or rather we can just put a not null constraint there, and then just run this create command to create this table. So we run this, and now let's try inserting data into this table. So we can insert a normal row of data with all values present. That means we've got a value for all the columns in the table. When we run this, you can see that it's inserted without an issue. But now when we come to this column, this row of data, which has a null value in the ID column, when we try and run this column now, you can see that, oh no, so sorry, my mistake. I inserted into the old table. So when we try and insert it into the new table with the not null constraint, and we run it, you can see we get the error. Cannot insert the value null into column ID table, because it does not allow nulls, and your insert fails. So as you can see, the constraint has been enforced. So now finally, just to show you guys, you can create tables with more than one not null constraint. So I'm gonna specify not null on any column of data that I never want empty. So I'll put on first name, last name, and email. So in a business use case, last name would generally not be specified as not null, because many people just have one name. But usually email, ID, like your ID, your first name, and your email are all values which would usually be specified as not null, and one of them could be the primary key also, which we'll look at later. But let's run this. I've called it students3. So now when we run this table is created successfully. And now let's just basically try and put in some null data in another position. So right here, as you can see, I've created a row of data where the second column, that is the first name column, is null, but I've specified it as not null. So when you run that, we can see that we get the error. And again, if I insert another row of data with both columns that I had specified with the not null constraint, and I'm inputting them as null, here in this case ID and first name, when I try to insert them with null values, you get the same issue. The insert fails. So we can see here how the not null constraint works. That was a little bit about the not null constraint. In the next video, we'll be looking at the unique constraint, which in most situations works very closely with the not null constraint. So stay tuned for that. And thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, and hit the bell icon. I'll see you guys in the next one.